Okay, afternoon all. My name is Andrew Allen. I'm a regional partner at DairyNZ. I've only got a few more words to say. I'm going to hand over to Kate Fransen, our lead project manager at DairyNZ. And the format is basically Kate will do most of the talking, followed by Wim and Maria Makker from Morrinsville, who farm out at Morrinsville. They grow plantain. They will describe their farming operation, how it utilises plantain, and then we'll have an opportunity after for some questions. So any questions, same as the last thing you're at, just hold the questions off and we'll allow a bit of time after. Thanks.
Sweet. Thanks very much, Andrew. Cool, we've got a small group, which is good. We can have a bit of discussion along the way. Before we start, can I get a show of hands who are farmers in the room? All right, keep your hand up. Who's a farmer? You a farmer? Yep, excellent. Can you keep your hand up if you grow plantain on your farm already? Awesome. So we've got a bit of experience in the room. So basically, my name's Kate Fransen. I lead this plantain potency and practice program at DairyNZ. DairyNZ's in the lead of this big program, but we actually have lots of partners. So we have across the top here our 4 funding partners, MPI, DairyNZ obviously, Fonterra and PGG Rights and Seeds. And we've got a couple of ladies from Agricom here, Casey and Laura, who are great for any questions along the lines of how do you get plantain established and maintain it. So those sorts of questions I might get them to help me with at the end. They're partnering with us in the program. Here is one of the 7 odd partners doing the mahi. And we've also got in the audience Gavin Scott and Steve Davis, who are helping us with some of the milk work, and I'm not sure if we've got anyone else in the room from the team, but this is a really big team, a really big program, and the reason why we're doing this is because this mitigation option at plantain is one of the cheapest ways we can reduce nitrate leaching in our pastoral systems in New Zealand. So we're putting a lot of effort behind it, a lot of money behind it, a $22 million program, because we really want to thoroughly look at this, make sure we've got it right, make sure farmers can implement it, and make sure we know just how much it works. So what are we doing? We're trying to quantify the effect of plantain on nitrate leaching. So we know that in small lysimeters, when we put urine through the lysimeter where there's plantain and where the urines come from the cows that have grazed plantain, we get quite a significant reduction in nitrate leaching. But we didn't know what happens when we put that at scale. So we've got 2 big farmlet experiments in Lincoln and Massey universities where we're actually measuring how much leaching's occurring under a farm system. We're also measuring the production and profit off those systems. We want to know it at how much it works, and we want to know it in different soils and climates. We want to understand more about how plantain works. So in a minute I'm going to put up a slide on how we think the plantain has 4 different mechanisms for reducing nitrate leaching. We want to quantify that in different soils, different climates, and understand exactly what's driving it so that we can model it. We also want to identify any risks to our markets. So you all remember the DCD stage and that sort of thing. We don't want another repeat of that. We want to make sure that plantain doesn't pose any risks to our markets, as well as identify any benefits. So we can categorically say already that, thanks to Steve's work and Gavin's work, we don't have any risk of human health problems from milk from plantain-fed pastures. But now we're actually looking into some potential benefits, and I'll talk about that. We want to develop management strategies to keep plantain in the pastures. So we have a network of 23 partner farmers across the country, like Wim and Maria here, who are helping us to work out what's the seeding rates that we need, how's best to get established in different soils, different climates, and we can't do that just by trials, because actually it seems to vary a lot. So what we're doing is using farmers to help us with that part of the program. We also have a network of 7 field trials, which are small plots looking at seeding rates and the likes, and Agricom are helping us with that. We have a plantain cultivar evaluation system. So the cultivar evaluation system is there because we've identified some differences between cultivars in how well they can reduce nitrate leaching. So at the moment, the seed companies need to be putting animals through met stalls to go through that process, but what we're doing is developing some plant-based tests. So in a few years' time, we should be able to just take the plant and say, take the cultivar and say, this is how much we think this plant will reduce nitrate leaching. Ecotane, which is the product marketed by Agricom, is currently the only product that's actually listed on our website at the moment as being effective for reducing nitrate leaching, and the reason for that is because we have good hard data that shows how much it works. We have recognition of plantain by regional councils. So now we can say that we've pretty much got recognition by all the regional councils who have limits in place across the country. But we're working together with regional councils to make sure we've got the right tools and processes in place so that it's easy for them to implement this in a regulatory way. You guys get recognition for it once you do it. And we want to make sure we get widespread adoption and impact, so improve the water quality and make sure that we maintain profitability. So how does Ecotane work? So we have 4 different mechanisms. The first one is the dilution effect. So these are real urine samples. If you come to my stand downstairs, you'll find them, the actual bottles. That's showing ryegrass, 40% and 80% plantain. So you're getting a dilution, and what's largely driving this is simply low dry matter percentage in the plantain. So the animals are eating a lot of water. There's a potential of a further diuretic effect going on as well, driven by these things called plant secondary compounds. We're still looking into how much that's actually having an effect, but we can actually model this pretty well, showing a low dry matter percentage driving the effect. The petitioning effect occurs because when the animal eats the grass and it goes into the rumen, into the digestive system, you've got a few different ways that it's going. So one is into urine, one's going into dung, and the other is going into milk, as well as maintenance. Okay? Petitioning is simply dividing up those different outputs differently. So in plantain, we get more going into dung, a bit more going into milk, largely through a production effect, not higher percentage of nitrogen in the milk, and less going into urine. And so we get less urine per day. The third effect is about what's going on in the soil. So what the science is telling us is that we think that when animals eat, sorry, I'll start again. The roots in the plantain are exuding this thing called plant secondary compounds. And what we think is happening is that the plant secondary compounds are slowing down the rate that urine, urine turns into ammonia, and it's slowing down the rate that ammonia turns into nitrate. And so the nitrate's the stuff that leaches, it's the soluble stuff. The ammonium is the stuff that can be used by the plant and is fairly stable. So we believe that that process is happening and that therefore the plant gets a better chance to utilise the nitrogen before it's lost. The last effect is this indirect nitrogen retention effect, which is basically the same thing going on, but the animals are eating these compounds, it's coming out in urine, and it's happening in the urine patch itself. And there's actually some good evidence showing that that effect going on in vitro. But we need a little bit more studies to work out exactly how and how much this bit is working. So what is the effect? We've been running this study at Massey University for 3 years. We have a farmlet study there that is looking at different levels of plantain. So what you're looking at here is ryegrass, white clover, and a low, medium and high plantain. The numbers across the top line are the percentage of plantain. The second line is how much is in the diet, because they've got supplementary feed in their system, so it goes down for how much is in the diet. The third line is how much clover is in the pasture, and the fourth line is the ryegrass. Now what we've found is that leaching varies with rainfall. So in that first year, it didn't rain very much, and so it didn't leach very much, okay? But when it did leach, it actually was 60% less on average with these treatments with plantain compared to the ryegrass. In the second year, they got more rain and it leached more, so it's a little bit more interesting. And you can see here that where there was 30% plantain or 20% in the diet, they got a 21% reduction in nitrate leaching, 46% at this level here, and that was with 30% in the diet. So they're good reductions, actually more than what we expected. So that was exciting. Now what tends to happen, and this is pretty classic, is that after a couple of years in the pasture, plantain starts to decline. And we're finding that on the farms as well. So you need to be able to top it up. But in this system, it got down to as low as 12% in the diet, 15% in the diet in this treatment, but they still got a pretty good reduction in nitrate leaching in these two treatments. But what happened here? So in this particular treatment, they were trying to push the levels of plantain up because they wanted it to be 70%, but it didn't really want to be 70%. It wanted to be a bit lower than that. So they kept over-sowing it with ryegrass and clover. And so the clover percentage kind of went through the roof. This is an average, 34%, but it was actually up as much as 50% in the autumn time. And because when animals are eating clover, you get a high amount of nitrogen going into the animal, you get high nitrogen coming out, so the urine patch is loaded and the nitrogen is further increased from the fixation of the nitrogen in the soil. So therefore leaching went up. So that's just something we have to watch. We've actually handily got some trial data from Massey previously that shows that it's about a 20% threshold on average. So above 20% on average of clover in the system, you start to increase your leaching. And so you need to keep it below that level. Plantain does like to grow with clover, so we just need to be conscious that particularly where you're sowing a straight crop with clover, you watch those clover levels. Okay. Lincoln has not yet got much data. They've got 1 year and it's showing similar trends to Massey. However, we don't really have messages as yet, other than to say it's looking good, but we'd like another year before we start to draw some conclusions from that. There's no stats on that slide, but yes, after another year, I'm hoping that we can start to draw some conclusions from Lincoln that it's working. Nitrous oxide emissions. So because we're reducing nitrogen in these urine patches, we also have an effect on nitrous oxide emissions, which is a greenhouse gas. So plantain this is an ag research study. They have shown that this is the level of plantain in the pasture. So where plantain is present, they're reducing nitrous oxide emissions. At this level, it was 53%. Okay, so that's quite a significant reduction in nitrous oxide. This one here is interesting. Remember I talked about that soil effect? So this is the soil effect at play. This is ryegrass put on plantain, ryegrass urine put on plantain pasture and leaching coming out the bottom, okay? So you're getting a reduction in nitrate leaching from plantain pastures with ryegrass urine, okay? If that makes sense. Simply from Massey experiment doing a similar thing, they also showed a reduction in nitrate leaching, so we're starting to get some consistency in data coming across. I just put this slide up because it's a cool picture. We do cool research in this program. There's fancy stuff with glass houses and hydroponics and that sort of thing. But no, this is our work to try and understand that soil effect going on. So we're trying to, this is plant and food research. They are looking at the effect of plant secondary compounds on that nitrification process that I showed you before. We've got some field trials done by AgResearch, done by Manaki Whenua Landcare and with Agricom running the trials, looking at nitrogen cycling in the soil in a field, as well as some lysimeter studies having a look at what's going on actually through the soil. So what about overseer? Well, we're already recognising plantain in overseer. This is a result of some previous research we did. And essentially, when we model, sorry, I should say, remember we talked about the 4 mechanisms? This is mechanisms 1 and 2 only in overseer. So these are the urinary effects shown in overseer. What we expect is that when we get all this new data through, we'll get that modelled in overseer by 2027-ish, and we should see increased reductions in nitrate leaching modelled in overseer when plantain's included in the pasture. But for now, these are all our partner farms. Modelled in overseer, on average they get a 6% reduction in nitrate leaching for every 10% of plantain in the pasture. So it's going to go up and down depending on how much supplement you've got in the system. Higher supplements, lower reduction because you've got less grass going into the feed, okay? Less plantain going into the diet. Okay, what about pasture production? So we simply get we seem to get a summer-autumn benefit, thank you, summer-autumn benefit from including plantain in the pasture in a dryland environment. These are our farmlet studies, so Lincoln over here and Massey over here. Now, what I should say is that irrigation was less than ideal in Lincoln in that particular year, and so they had a benefit. This year, the data's not showing that. It's just showing that it's the same, okay, because they improved their irrigation system. So where ryegrass is growing properly in an irrigated system, you're not seeing much of a benefit. But certainly, consistently, this is what we see in the dryland environment. Down here, we've got our some different data. So no change in feed quality in these systems from the farmlet studies, no change in milk production per cow. At the Tararua, where we've measured lots of different farms, on average a pasture production benefit of 13%. And where you look at meta-analysis of lots of different studies, we're seeing a 0.07 kilo milk solids per cow increase in production. I was also having a chat to David over here who uses plantain, and he seems to think that he's seeing a really prominent production response in his cows as well from grazing plantain. So what about persistence? So this slide is showing you different ways that farmers are getting plantain into the system. So pure plantain, sometimes also sown with clover. New grass plus sown with plantain, drilled. Broadcasting out the back of the fertiliser with the fertiliser spreader, and undersowing or direct drilling into existing pastures. So sowing time is recommended across the top there, seeding rates suggested across the bottom here. I will say that particularly in the Waikato and Bay of Plenty, farmers that I've seen that are broadcasting plantain are doing it at less than this and getting quite a bit of success. So Steve Holdham in Rotorua does it at 2 kilos, but he does it every year across the whole farm, and he seems to find that works very well. This number here is how much plantain you're getting in the sward in terms of percentage. So in the Tararua, you can see that broadcasting is not particularly effective, but we are seeing higher amounts in the Waikato and Bay of Plenty. It seems to work better up here. And then we're seeing that you actually get a decline after about 2.5 years. So farmers that are sowing it are seeing that it seems to peak 6 months to a year after they sow it, and then it starts to decline after about 2.5 years. And so sowing it on a cycle of about a 3-year cycle, or just broadcasting it every year like some farmers are, seems to be the way to go. In terms of the economics, so we're very lucky to have our partner farmers who are willing to open the books to us. And so Steve Holdham is one of our farmers in Rotorua. We've modelled his farm using Overseer and Farmax. In Overseer, Steve has to reduce his nitrate leaching in that Rotorua catchment from 59 down to 41, which is quite a significant drop. And so that's a 31% drop. Steve's stocking rate to do that if we just reduce cow numbers, is about a 31% drop in stocking rate, funnily enough. If we include plantain at 30%, he has to drop it by about 7%. There's another option we modelled here, which is standoff pad plus 30 hectares of trees, which Steve was interested in, and that was a 5% drop in stocking rate as well to get there. Some of the other things are listed here as to what's in those scenarios. In terms of operating profit, you can see the difference there. So a 4% drop with plantain, 10% with fewer cows, and 17% with the standoff option. Now, what Steve's excited about is that the time that he needs to get to the next drop down is 2027, which is coinciding when we think we might get these other effects into the overseer model. And so he might not have to reduce stocking rate at all. So that's, yeah, that's really meaningful for these guys to actually be able to have something cheap and easy for them to put on their system. So what about these market risks and opportunities? So plantain-fed cows, what we can say, and a lot of this work's been done by Fonterra, by the guys sitting here. We can say that there's no risk to human health from drinking milk from plantain-fed cows, because we were interested in whether these plant secondary compounds turning up in the milk might pose a problem for us, but no, they don't. And potential benefit, higher omega-3. So this is the stuff that's marketed as beneficial in things like strawberries and olives and fish. So that's a potential marketing benefit for us. We heard from Melissa this morning that that's potentially quite important. No material impact on milk composition. Where you do get high amounts of plantain in the diet, like 80%, there are some recorded depressions in fat. But at these sort of levels that we're talking about, you know, 30, 40, 50%, no issues with milk composition. No effect on milk urea and nitrogen. Higher minerals. Plantain is better at harvesting minerals than ryegrass, and so you end up with higher minerals. Unfortunately, that means it's also better at harvesting heavy metals. And so in cadmium risk areas, we're actually looking at the potential for that to be an issue. In offal, it'll turn up in offal rather than the meat itself. But yeah, at this stage, yeah, we're just looking into that as a potential, you know, what is the risk, essentially. Potentially improve somatic cell count. So there's one study that shows that they didn't have a high somatic cell count, but it was reduced in the plantain pastures. So that's something we can look further into. Probably a similar effect as to what's going on with the anthelmintic benefits of plantain. So plantain is well known for reducing worm burden in sheep, and so possibly a similar thing going on there. We do know that there's less spore counts on facial eczema spore counts on plantain versus ryegrass, and we're looking to collect a little bit more data there, but possibly reducing the risk of facial eczema. Small increase in fat evaluation index. So if you're already high on your fat evaluation index, this could potentially push you over. But if you, yeah, it's not a high thing like PK, for example. And research is ongoing for the impact on processability. So Fonterra's currently working on things like milk and cheese and butter, taste, texture, any differences there, or any potential benefits. Okay. I've already talked about the cultivar evaluation system, but I'll just briefly say that we've got 4 field trials across the country at the moment, plot trials, where we're comparing 10 different cultivars, that's all of them, and having a look at the things that are potentially driving reductions in nitrate leaching, the differences between the cultivars, and developing that system a bit further. Our website, we have a whole page on plantain. A couple of the things I'll point out here are the visual assessment guide. So in regional councils where they have limits in place, and also on your Fonterra, what's that thing called? The what is it? Farm dairy records. They have a question on there about how much plantain have you got in the pasture, How do you know that? There is a visual assessment guide on the website, and so get in there and have a look at that. This is what it looks like, and it's surprisingly accurate. We have a calibration for how much is, for somebody walking out into the pasture and saying, that looks like it's about 30%, and then doing the cuts, it's actually coming out reasonably accurate, which is handy for us trying to implement a system. We also have the plantain cultivar evaluation system on there. This is all the stuff I've been talking about today, and we're continually updating that with our research, environmental benefits of plantain. And then lastly, building this page on plantain management. And we're certainly relying on the likes of Wim and Maria here and others who are using plantain to tell us their stories about how it's going. So that's an excellent segue to Wim and Maria. I'll hand over to them to tell their story about what they're doing. Oh, I've got to turn this off.
Thank you. We are Wim, and this is my wife Maria Makker, and we are farming in Kiwitahi, Morrinsville. We're on rolling country, some of it's flat. We farm about 108 hectares, about 98 effective, and we milk about 300 cows. I started with plantain probably about 4 years ago now. I read up about it, and yeah, sort of the environmental benefits sort of stood out. Something that might be worth a try, that wasn't actually going to cost a lot, and if it didn't work I can always spray it out. That was my thinking behind it. The other thing we were interested in, we have quite a bit of ryegrass staggers in our herd on our farm, and especially in the summer months, and I thought if we put a bit of plantain with a dye, that might actually give a quite good dilution effect, and it certainly has. I started sowing it in September. We are a spring calving herd. I sowed it in September, I think it started about the 20th of September. I've got a little Walco spinner behind my bike, four-wheeler, and I sold it at 4 kilos to the hectare, which was uncoated seed the first time I used it. So I went pretty close, because once you're sowing it at that smaller rates, you haven't actually got a lot of, you don't actually know, once it leaves the spinner you can't actually see where it's gone. So I decided to have a reasonable sort of a cover, and so it drove pretty close. That spring was actually quite dry when I sowed it. The ground was probably a little bit crusty, and we sort of didn't really see the benefits from that until the autumn that year, when it actually came through. After the autumn rains happened, it sort of, the plantain certainly came through. It's a very, some people tell me, it's a very hardy seed. It's it will grow at some stage, and it did. The last time we've in the trial that we're on, we sold it in the springtime, and I sold it at a slightly higher rate. It was sold at about I think it was 7.2 or 7.5 kilos to the hectare, but it was prill coated seed, and we certainly have. And it was because the conditions were damper when I sold it. Did a similar thing, oversold it just behind the cows. We had a pretty good take, I think, from that. Certainly better than the prill coated seed. Certainly had a better take than a non prill coated seed. It's certainly, like this summer, it certainly has loved the wet summer. The plantain has really come through quite strong, I feel, in our places, especially in the areas that I sold this spring, and it seems to be doing pretty good. You are limited with spraying. That's the only thing. Like, you can't do your winter spray that's probably one of the bit of a downfall on it. You know, you can't do your winter spray for your buttercup or anything like that. And also, if you've got a problem with kellies or the other one's penny royal, those sort of areas, you wipe the plantain out with that as well if you spray that. The oldest pastures now have got, they are 4 years old now, and I think they've actually, especially through the wetter summer we've had, have actually come through pretty good. I can still see the paddocks that we've done and say, oh man, actually that actually looks actually pretty good. And I think actually some of them have actually got probably 15% coverage in them still for the plantain, so I think that's quite encouraging. The other thing I was quite interested in, of course, is the overseer thing. To have it, I would have liked to see it, isn't it, like the Piako, Matamata Piako doesn't actually include it yet in the overseer, but I'd hope to have that calculated into the overseer as well, put into there, and that would actually be quite, help you with your nitrogen leaching. We haven't seen any. When you put plantain in, we found that the cows graze it just the same as anything else, like the grass. They don't go selectively for the plantain plants. They don't shy it either. It just once you graze it, it's grazed, and then the cows just seem to just graze it just normal. It fits really well into like your normal rotation. We found it doesn't go to seed, or goes to seed, but it goes to seed at the same rate as what your ryegrasses do. If you have chicory, and you probably find that if you have undersold chicory, you find in the second and the third year, now you get after 15 days, now your chicory goes to seed, and it goes grows into a hard stalk, and the cows got shy away from that, but the plantain doesn't do that. It seems to stay quite even. So far we found it quite successful. We're looking forward just to continue with the program.
Cool. Have we got any questions? Is there another roving mic around?
The winter weed spray, without it, the spring is, we've got a pre-grazed mow, and there's all sorts of, we need that winter weed spray. We're down to about half the farm only, but I believe that there are chemicals available now that will make won't necessarily take out the plantain.
Yep. Do you guys want to have a go?
Yeah, we can probably elaborate on it a little bit more. You're absolutely right, there is certainly some more options on the market now in terms of more so for your post-establishment, if you're, say, including plantain in with your new pastures initially. There's a couple of good options there now for, say, small weeds emerging, but that does then become complicated, like you say, for your winter sprays. There's certain ways that you can sort of manage around that, and it all depends on what you're trying to achieve. And there's a couple of examples of where, say, if we know that plantain is persisting in our pastures at a pretty solid rate for about 3 years, and say you're rotating around your farm and you've got some blocks that are worse than others, is targeting the farms that are, say, you've done really good weed control on them for the last few years, you come in with your plantain, you know it's, say, going to persist really well for 3 years, and then you're going to be looking at introducing more, is then targeting your weed spray then. So you can be quite targeted. There is research happening in the herbicide space. It will be a while away. I'm not sure, in terms of that, there is options there because we know it is a limitation. And that's starting right back from the plant breeding space as well. So there is some progression in that space because we definitely, we know it is a limitation. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No.
I'll forget about the nitrogen if I've got to have an untidy farm covered in kellies and I can't handle it, then plantain goes.
Kate, can I just add a little comment to that? And Casey's really touched on this, but a number of the chemical companies are doing work in this space. It's a little bit chicken and egg. I guess they're waiting to see, before they put too much effort in, whether this thing's going to fly. but a lot of this work is reasonably well progressed, and for some of these products it'll be a label extension as opposed to a new product. So there's some light on the horizon. Yep.
Take up of the concept.
It certainly will, and we're pushing really hard in that space and trying to encourage it.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Yep.
Hi, Kate. So this is kind of a quite simple question, but I was just something I didn't 100% get. If the nitrogen's not leaching, where is it actually going?
Yeah. Good question. We have a little bit of those questions too. So some of our nitrogen cycling sort of studies is trying to track a little bit about where it's not going, but partly the urine effect's easy to explain. So you're getting, in the dilution, so cows are actually not peeing more per event, they're peeing more times, right? So the urine patch is the problem for leaching. It's really high in nitrogen, but if you get more urine patches across the paddock, then it's spreading it out like a better fertiliser spreader, yeah? So that's that part of it.
So more of it's then being taken up by the plants?
Yes, then it's been utilised by the plants, yeah. Now, petitioning effect's sort of similar in that, oh, it's a bit different actually. You're getting less nitrogen in urine in general, more into dung, and dung is more stable for holding the nitrogen. It will eventually go into the soil as well, but it doesn't leach like the urine does. For the other effects going on, slowing down this nitrification process, it's allowing the plants more time to utilise the nitrogen before it's lost. But that should say that we should need less fertiliser. Yeah. And so some farmers are finding that they need less fertiliser when they've got plantain in the pastures, but we haven't got any more than kind of anecdotal evidence of that as yet. So kind of forming good answers to your question is part of what our research program is about. Yep.
Is there any rotation length that becomes too fast for plantain? Is any difference between a runoff block, which usually the pressure is different, to a milking platform?
I'll answer the first question. So in general, the advice is that plantain can be grown or grazed on a very similar rotation to perennial ryegrass. However, you do get penalised for leaving your rotation too long, particularly in that late autumn period and heading into winter, because plantain gets, ryegrass gets 3 leaves and then grows a 4th one. The first one dies. In plantain, it just keeps producing new leaves. Yep, and they're all green, but the ones on the outside are a bit like the bitter ones in your lettuce patch that aren't very nice to eat. And so if you allow your rotation to go too long, then those leaves can appear, and the only way to kind of get rid of them if you don't force your cows to eat them is to top them. But in terms of grazing pressure on different types of pastures, like a runoff or a beefy block or that sort of thing, I'd imagine it'd be no different. Any advances on that? No. So yeah, you'd be just grazing at the same sort of rotation length as a perennial ryegrass is the best guide, and then just watching your rotation length at that time of year when it can be a little bit bitter, causing palatability issues. Well, I've been around to a lot of farms recently that are growing plantain, and I'm finding that there's a bit of a variation in the story about this palatability thing, and some farmers just swear by the fact that it's just no different and they don't have any issues. And then there's others that sort of say, I've got a problem. And so getting a bit more into those stories and trying to get some samples of those plants, I'm actually a little bit interested in that space myself. Mm.
The one thing we do on our places, we do give a lime. We have a small dose of lime every year. You know, the whole farm gets about 350 kilos a year. And that might make a difference to the palatability as well, I suggest.
Did you have anything to add to that other question? You graze it the same as ryegrass, yeah? Yep.
Just around the cultivar difference space, I know you're still doing work on that, but is it sort of maybe relating to the secondary compounds rather than other cultivars having other differences in the other sort of effects?
So there's a few papers on this. So there is a paper that shows some differences in the dilution effect, right? And so they have shown in that paper that there is a difference between agrotonic, which was the cultivar that showed the dilution effect, and other cultivars. Okay, which cultivars and what don't know, and so we're hoping to be able to get some more data on that pretty soon, and then. The other effects in terms of the secondary compounds, so we don't actually have any papers on that soil effect showing differences, but we do have a paper that shows a difference between cultivars in the nitrification effect when it's put through the urine. So remember I talked about the animals eating those secondary compounds, they come out the other end and then you get this nitrification inhibition going on in the urine itself. That's where they've shown a difference between cultivars. And that's enough for DairyNZ to say, we probably can't just say that they're all the same. And so we're going to back the confidence that we've got in having lots of data on agrotonic and tonic, which was its predecessor. And we're going to put a system in place where we're going to test these things and make sure that they're effective before we put them out. There is no doubt that there's going to be other cultivars that are going to be effective. It's just that we can't have confidence in any of them until we test them. Yep.
Just wondering about the costs of putting it in, if that if there's what the costs are, if there's any sort of economic benefits.
Yep. So in terms of the cost, so Steve Holdham's farm, I think the cost per hectare was $54. Now, but he was putting on a pretty low seeding rate, so that was at 2 kilos a hectare over his whole farm. Some of the other farms that we've done with slightly higher seeding rates and broadcasting it once again, it's more like $100 a hectare. Cost of the seed?
Well, that's pretty much it, really, isn't it? Yeah, in terms of if you're just broadcasting. Yep. It's roughly about that at, say, 8 kilos of prill-coated. So just an elaboration on what Wim was talking about earlier around the coating of the seed. So there's two options there, and initially they were doing 4 kilos of beer product, which is just the seed, and because plantain seed is so small, you can imagine it doesn't go very far, hence Wim was very smart about it and drove very, very close together. And so what prill coating is, it is a lime coating that goes around the seed to then actually double the weight, which allows it to then spread further, so just allowing for better ballistics, particularly if you are going at a larger scale and say doing it on the back of a fertiliser truck. They say spread, up to 13 or so metres wide, and small seed can only spread about 6, so you just end up with bands. So you don't pay any more for prill coating, even though the rate is higher, so your per hectare price would still be the same, whether it's beer or whether it's prill coated, but roughly around the 80 to 100, I think, per hectare for broadcasting. If you were, say, looking at going at like a pure crop, which would also be solutions for if you're not, say, wanting to go whole hog and put it across your whole farm, is do a concentrated area and look at doing a pure stand crop, because then that does give you really good options for weed control, and that would be looking at, I think for putting a summer crop in at the moment, you're looking at around that $1,500 to $1,800 a hectare, depending on how intensive it is. But yeah, does that answer the question?
And we're out of time. Thank you very much all.
Yep.
Kate, do you want to quickly wrap up?
Sure.
Firstly, Wim and Maria, you'll be around after. There will be questions after, no doubt. Kate, you'll be around for...
Yeah, I'll be around afterwards, and we've got a stand down the bottom as well. Come and see me there. Just a quick acknowledgement of the funding organisations for this program. The program is funded by MPI through the Sustainable Farm Future Fund, and as well as we've got funding from DairyNZ and PGG Rights and Seeds and Fonterra. So thanks very much, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
And a thank you to Wim and Maria.
And thank you very much to Wim and Maria.